The great behemoth British Leyland was responsible for some great cars and some even greater mistakes. From lost wonders cancelled prematurely, like the Rover P6BS, to the intentional sabotage of its own engine, the Rover SD1 six-cylinder, British Leyland made some very public and very damning mistakes. One mistake would come to define British Leyland's terminal condition, the cancellation of what could have been its saviour, a car that was 10 years ahead of the competition, the BMC 9X. In the subsequent decades, British Leyland would find this mistake costly, allowing cars like the Ford Fiesta, Peugeot 205 and VW Polo to dominate the market. This is the story of the lost Alec Isagonis masterpiece, the BMC 9X, the genius creation that could have saved one of the largest manufacturers of cars the UK has ever known, and how British Leyland had a significant lead, but through severe miscalculation and internal strife, squandered it, leading to their own downfall. Hello everybody and welcome to this video. If you're not subscribed already, please make sure to do so. It really does help me out and you get to see more of this. More history videos, more conversions, and more projects like my Ford Cortina and 2600R, my Rover SD1. This video is on one of British Leyland's biggest mistakes, the cancellation of BMC 9X. Let me know in the comments below what your opinions on 9X are and what you think British Leyland's worst mistake was. Like the video if you liked it. But without further delay, let's get into one of the worst mistakes British Leyland ever made, the cancellation of their own future. The BMC 9X. Alec Isagonis, designer of the Mini, one of the greatest small cars the world has ever known. An example of a designer and a company reacting to the world and market events, innovating not just for the sake of a portfolio, but out of necessity for the driving public. The Mini, of course, would go down in history as the 20th century's most iconic British car. BMC in the 60s would continue to innovate with cars such as the Aerodynamica range designed in conjunction with Pininfarina, creating cars such as the BMC Mini Sports, the 1800 and 1100 Aerodynamica cars that were far ahead of the competition. The innovation led by Alec Isagonis wouldn't stop either. The Mini, although successful, wasn't flawless, and Alec and his team knew this. A comprehensive review of the weaknesses of the Mini was undertaken for its replacement. In the very early days of the Mini, according to AROnline, service garages would hold their hands up in alarm at the sight of the car, with its relatively cramped engine bay compared to conventional cars at the time. A good example of conventional packaging would be the Austin A30, which allowed for near 360 degrees of access to the engine and its ancillaries, compared to the Mini's cramped offering. Service providers and the public alike would adapt, of course, to the Mini's packaging, proving it not to be as alarming as these early garages would have customers believe, with transverse engines becoming mainstream in later years. There was another innovation that the Mini would miss out on, a hatchback. BMC had watched as the Creech Mystique and Crayford's offerings of the 1100 and 1300 during the 60s had created an even more practical ADO 16. Other manufacturers, however, hadn't caught on quite yet, but they would soon. Alec Isagonis in 1967 would take an unprecedented step, requesting to step down from his role as head of new car development, so he could concentrate on a world-beating idea to replace the Mini. The Mini, a classless icon, was to be replaced by the next generation of front-wheel drive models, and on agreement with George Harriman, chairman of BMC, he was allowed to step down to focus on this new venture. The great designer would gather a team of engineers that he personally hand-picked, the best of the best, to pursue this new innovation. This was the same circumstances that had helped spawn the Mini, a small team of great minds coming together for one common goal, to innovate. The 9X's development would begin in the late 60s, with the lessons learned from the Mini being applied to the new car. Amidst the turbulent backdrop of the industry at the time, the mock-ups were coming together. At around 9 foot 8 inches, the car was shorter than the Mini, which was just over 10 feet long, and lighter, with even more interior room thanks to its clever packaging. This car would feature the elusive hatchback, becoming the first Super Mini, predating the Ortobonici A112. The car was beginning to take shape. Its styling, which was created by Sid Goebel and Fred Boubier, was a smart yet modern approach to small car design, and the interior would have an incredibly thin fascia and a stripped speedo, the Isogonis classic design, which would also appear in the 1965 European Car of the Year, the 1800. Its engine, the DX, was a true technical marvel, the replacement for the A-Series. The engine design team within the small project team was headed by John Shepard. The new engine would have a displacement between 750cc and 1000cc, outputting 60 brake horsepower per litre, with the 1 litre prototype outperforming the 998cc Mini by 20 brake horsepower. This steep rise in performance was mainly due to the overhead camshaft, as opposed to the Mini's overhead valve A-Series, which had several design weaknesses. The overhead valve engine, due to its design, would result in valve timing being less efficient at higher RPMs, with pushrod flex also decreasing accuracy as well as efficiency. The new DX engine would have an overhead camshaft, allowing for more precise timing, which with less components and more accurate timing resulted in higher efficiency and, of course, more power output. The innovations didn't stop there. The new overhead camshaft was the first innovation for this small car. The packaging would be next. The new gearbox would have a two-shaft design, which sat beneath and behind the engine rather than directly below in the case of the Mini, foregoing the Mini's transfer gear arrangement, making the 9X quieter and more refined. The crankcase and cylinder head were made from aluminium alloy, while the block was cast iron, with all three sections being held together by long through bolts, 20 years ahead of the K-Series. This made the package a lot lighter, with the new DX engine weighing in at around 90 kilograms, 64 kilograms lighter than the Mini's A-Series, which weighed 154 kilograms. The engine is said to have been designed to be modular, for expansion during production, which of course was proven in its later life, with a 1.5 litre 6-cylinder being created and fitted to a Metro. The DX would have one more innovation up its sleeve. It would have just one belt to drive the camshaft, with the alternator and starter motor part of the flywheel assembly. This again decreased the size of the overall package. In 1968, a fully engineered prototype would be created, a car that was far ahead of the competition, beating the Fiat 127, Peugeot 104, Renault 5 and VW Polo. Management in 1968 would be presented with a highly capable and innovative car, years ahead of the competition, but there was a problem. BMC could not commit to production. At the time it was looking incredibly likely that Leyland, with its management troubles, and the massive but financially ailing BMC would merge. And of course they did, creating British Leyland Motor Corporation. BLMC's directors would drive the 9X after the merger, but of course in usual BL fashion, this would be sidelined. The tumultuous takeover and conflicting ideas within the two companies that had merged made some of the parts of BLMC completely unworkable during the early years of the merger, with one of the engineers at the time recalling Longbridge, once an open place with ideas flowing under Austin and BMC, would become a silo mentality workplace, with parts of the same organisation working independently, or even in the case of some, against their new colleagues. In spite of all the trouble at the time, the 9X would continue development. The chassis was next on the team's list, a completely new development with more conventional McPherson struts at the front and a beam axle at the rear. This would be the template for almost all European super minis during the 20th century. Testing would also continue, even with the overcast of doubt caused by the merger, with several DX engines being fitted to standard minis for testing. The car in 1970 was beginning to finalise into what could have been British Leyland's world-beating hatch, righting all of the mistakes of the early Mini, proving not to be just an evolution of the Mini, but a revolution. The 9X would prove to be an answer to the early Mini's problems in several ways. Cost of production. The Mini, at the expense of its engineering, was rushed to market by BMC. This resulted in BMC making a loss on all of the earlier cars, thanks to the initial component complexity to create such a small car. The 9X, however, would use 42% less individual components than the Mini, and conventional suspension as opposed to the hydroelastic suspension introduced in 1964 to all UK Minis, which made them even more costly to produce. Practicality would be next. The Mini, a saloon car, would have a relatively small boot. Alec Issigonis at the time would refuse to make this change to a hatchback, but of course the public thought different, and with the popularity of the hatchback conversions and public opinion, the 9X would have its hatchback, resulting in a more versatile car. Practicality, however, wouldn't be solved with just the hatchback. The Mini, although a genius package, could not seat 4 adults without significant discomfort. The 9X, even though it was shorter than the Mini, thanks to the clever packaging of its engine and gearbox, would afford even more interior room. At this point, the 9X was looking incredibly promising, even being explored as a larger car, the 10X essentially being a better packaged Allegro. The 9X was the car British Leyland needed. It was the car to take them through the financial and internal turmoil of the early 70s, allowing them to get a head start beating their rivals to production with a category-defining car. The inner turmoil in the early 70s would get even worse, with management including Donald Stokes placing most of the blame for the financial turmoil of the entirety of British Leyland on its Austin Morris division's doorstep. George Turnbull, former Triumph executive, would be appointed head of the Austin Morris division to cut costs and improve efficiency, which involved focusing on cars that were already turning a steady profit and slashing financial investment in the division. Employees and some directors would rave about the 9X being a superb machine, but finances to the Austin Morris division were being cut. The 9X would need a significant last financial push to be production ready, but of course this was not to be. The Mini was still doing well and selling in the tens of thousands. After the axing of its hydrogas suspension in 1971, the Mini was finally returning a small profit. BLMC's short-sightedness had won again, to its own detriment. Sir Alec Issigonis would officially retire from British Leyland in 1971, continuing to work as a consultant for the firm. That same year, as if Sir Alec and his team were prophets sent by the motoring gods, the European motoring landscape would be taken over by the European Super Minis, which shared nearly the exact same concept as the BMC 9X. The Fiat 127, launched in 1971, would be regarded as the car that defined the modern Super Mini. It would of course be a sales hit. The Renault 5 and Peugeot 104 would be next. Meanwhile, Alec Issigonis and several employees were pleading with BL's management to take another look at the 9X. British Leyland 2 years later, as a response to these cars, would launch the Austin Allegro, the complete opposite. Although a good car in its own right, it had no hatchback. It had hydrogas suspension, for better or worse, the complete opposite of what the motoring public wanted. At the time, the motorist wanted hatchback practicality and simplistic suspension, but BL had again misjudged the market. With the Allegro not having the hatchback that BL was so allergic to, the Allegro would flop in sales compared to its rivals. BL had again lost the lead by sidelining the 9X, and now they had to play catch-up with the new ADO 74 project, but this would never be launched. Thanks to the BL's turmoil, it would progress incredibly slowly. 3 years later, with the completion of Ford's Project Bobcat, the all-new Fiesta would be launched in 1975. The Ford Fiesta would become one of the best-selling cars in the UK. British Leyland had done it again. They had beaten the competition decisively with a project, but decided not to execute at the last moment. The 9X is another example of BL's short-sightedness. Sir Alec Issigonis would continue development of the DX engine, managing to fit a 6-cylinder in a Metro, but in 1987 his contract would be terminated. He would pass away a year later in 1988. BL would finally launch their Super Mini in 1980, after much turmoil. 12 years after the 9X, and 9 years after the competition, with the likes of the Fiat 127 and Ford Fiesta already embedded in the consciousness of the car-buying public, the Metro, although a success, would not see the same sales numbers as its competitors. BL's path to disaster is paved with cancellations, mismanagement, and strike action as well. But the 9X, to me at least, represents the British Leyland condition becoming terminal and cementing their downfall. Of all of the BL missed opportunities, the 9X is probably the worst. Make sure to like the video if you liked it and share it with other people so they can see this marvellous piece of history. Let me know your opinion as well by dropping a comment below. But as always, thank you for watching, keep watching, and remember to subscribe for more of this, and I'll see you in the next one.